Hey friends, my name's Mary, and I wanted to thank Fran and Kevin for following their hearts and creating this group for like-hearted people and people seeking connection to come together. Yahuga Tribe is something that makes my heart sing to consider where it could go and the relevance of the symbol and thriving amongst the shadows. I know I certainly walked in the valley of my shadow for a long time and found blossom even in those shadows. So I offered to share my story, and when I sit and think about that, I really think we all have several stories, don't we? So which one? Which part of me do I want to share? So I'm just going to speak and let it come through me. Whatever happens, whatever's said, I trust that it's relevant to this group at this time. So I was born in Windsor, Nova Scotia, in a rural community outside of Windsor there. I grew up in a family where there wasn't a great deal of financial abundance. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for the first part of my life, and my father was a carpenter. When I was 5, my mom went back to work, or started work as a nurse, started her education maybe around that time for nursing. And that's actually one of the first registered traumas in my life that I remember, was how upset I was when my mom went to work outside the home. I have 2 older brothers, and I was so pumped, like that feeling of, Nick's going to school, that's my middle brother, I'm finally going to get time with my mom alone. And then she went to school. So the year I was home and my brother was in school, I was watched by my grandmother, which was actually a huge blessing in disguise, because my grandmother is this, or was this, feisty Irish and Scottish woman that was raised Catholic, but came to her own place of beliefs in life and in God. And so that year with her was actually exactly what I needed. I'm sure of it. You know, nothing happens by mistake in the universe. That's my firm belief. So I went through school, very active, probably undiagnosed ADHD. And because I was very intelligent, quote unquote, with bookmarks, school smarts, everything went under the radar. So in my adult life, I've come to understand that I'm actually on the spectrum of dyslexia somewhere. And luckily, my chosen career and my life path hasn't taken me anywhere where either of those conditions or ways of my brain matter. So I went through school. During my high school years, middle school years, I really became an addict. So I began my addictions with food and sex. I would say were my first 2 addictions. I didn't know it at the time, but in recovery, I've learned that about myself. When I was probably 12, 13, I started to experiment with drugs and alcohol. And by the time I was 16, I was a full-blown, I called it partier at the time. But I found acceptance in that group of people in my high school and with older friends as well, that I could be vibrant, be loud, be crazy and fun. And I always had an excuse because I was high or drunk, right? So I could do or say anything, and there was no consequences in my head because I had an excuse. So I spent a long time in that cycle of short-term relationships, friendships. Some are long-term, but very few. I still accomplished my high school graduation, although I would go to the bar. I would sneak into the bar with friends' ID in grade 11 and 12, and got kicked out of school actually in grade 12 for lack of attendance. So when you miss so many days, no matter what your marks are, you immediately get discharged from this school. So that happened, and I had to go to summer school. I feel like I was looking for love in all the wrong places. So I was also promiscuous at different times throughout my teenage years. And I thought sex equaled love. And I didn't know it at the time, but I really thought that. But of course, now it's become really blatantly clear that you can have the act of physical sex without love. And you can have love, deep love, true soul love without sex. So I've really expanded my definition of love. And also my definition of party. Party for me has no drugs, no alcohol. A party for me these days looks really different. So moving past my high school days, I went to Alberta. As soon as I graduated, after that first summer, I moved to Banff. And I had a time, you can imagine, like a party girl, fresh out of high school. It was beautiful. So the mountains there called to me, and two of my girlfriends went as well. And we worked at the Fairmont in a beautiful castle in the mountains. So we played there and worked there. Addictions were running rampant in my life. But all that time, there was a thread throughout my life, and that thread was spirituality. That previous to going to Banff, I had my tarot cards read by a beautiful woman who inspired me, and continued to feel a deep call to her. So I actually ended up taking some spiritual lessons with this woman in Wolfville. I met her at a farm market, and it was like full body chills. Like at the time I was an atheist. I didn't believe in anything non-physical, not tangible, but her words were so true and about the past. And then when she predicted the future and it came true, it was like, again, full body knowing there's something about that. There's something about her way of life, this teacher and this reader, this spiritual reader at the time. So in Banff, I ended up with a back injury. I herniated a disc in my back and had 2 bulging discs. So I had nerve irritation. And that thread, that spiritual thread, called me to a holistic fair after this injury. Medical intervention did nothing. So they told me, the limp I had was permanent, that this was as good as it gets. Take your pain meds, try to get on some disability, and this is as good as your life gets. I was 20 years old. So also very strong-willed. I was not taking that as the truth. So I sought out, through this thread leading me to a holistic fair, a woman was set up doing Reiki. So I sat down with her and did a little mini 15-minute treatment. I think it was $20. And I got up, and no word of a lie, my limp was almost completely gone. And I was like, what? My body felt the most vitality that I had felt in years. And I actually was already almost a year sober. So after the injury, I was on pain medication that I couldn't interact with alcohol or other drugs. So I was sober from alcohol and party drugs, and stepped into this healing experience that was profound. So I went to private sessions with this woman for about 3 or 4 months and was pain-free. Like, unless I, shoveled or something, I might have felt the pain in my back, but it was gone. So that awakened something in me, that there is something more at work here, that my atheist thought process had to be questioned. So I went back to Banff, I went back to Alberta, and I took my level 1 and 2 Reiki training at that time in Banff. I can't explain it, but something changed in me that I didn't want to drink anymore. Like I didn't want to. It wasn't even a decision. It just happened. I could no longer eat fast food for a time. This has changed many times throughout my life since, but the vibration of Reiki being attuned in me during my training shifted my cells, shifted my mindset too. So a year after my attunement, or less than a year, I became pregnant with my son. my first child. So I moved home from Alberta. That relationship was a very toxic, short relationship with a controlling, abusive man. So I left when I was 3 months pregnant. I left with nothing. I went to work one day in Calgary at this time, and I just left in a cab, and I went to the airport and left with my purse and a few personal items in it, and that was it. I came home. I had my son, and in that time continued to dive deep into spirituality. So I began to meditate. I took classes. I was reading about palmistry. I was reading tarot cards. I had played with them for years since that woman read my cards, but really was reading them at that time, probably when I was 20, 21. And my life changed. I also, however, was unable to maintain my sobriety at that time. So after my son's birth, at exactly the 8-week mark, so I had a C-section, 8 weeks, they told me no alcohol, to take it easy. And I was sober after the back injury, sober during the pregnancy. So it had been probably 2 years since I had any drinks or alcohol. And on that 8th week, I partied hard. But it was divine timing, because at that New Year's Eve party, I met what is now my husband and the father of my next 2 children. So that divine thread also led me there. Probably didn't need to overindulge in alcohol or drugs, but I did. And I tailspinned. So throughout that time, I've created an amazing life and business of spirituality. I have studied in different countries, different provinces, taught hundreds of people theta healing and Reiki, have witnessed healing in others that moves me to my core. But in that time, really struggled with addiction. So it's a hereditary knowing for me that people, and many people in my family lineage, are alcoholics and drug addicts and food addicts. So I'm now 16 months sober and in the program of AA. So, I couldn't do it on my own, even with a very spiritual knowing, a very spiritual life, with lots of support. I have amazing community, but even with that, it wasn't enough. I kept my sobriety short term, and I would always call it a cleanse, mid-20s to now I'm 33. I would call it a cleanse. So I'd go 6 weeks, 6 months, even without alcohol or drugs. But there was always an expiry date on the sobriety. I always knew in my heart that I would go back to it until I was 30. So I had a revelation actually when I was 28. I was at a course in Montana in the States, and the teacher there was a recovered alcoholic, and she shared her story about her recovery. And it was like full body knowing, oh my gosh, I'm an addict. I had thought before that I was a partier, that I was a social drinker. I had it all under control because I had, I still had my life. I wasn't, losing everything over an addiction. I had a predetermined definition in my head of what an alcoholic and an addict was, and I didn't fit it. And I think my addiction made sure I didn't fit it, because then I'd have to change it, right? So at that time, that teacher invited me to go to an AA meeting, and I stood her up twice. I didn't go. She waited for me in the mornings, and I didn't go. And she was really understanding, of course, because she had many years of recovery. I was pregnant at the time, actually, so I wasn't actively drinking. But when I thought about, oh my gosh, this isn't just a 9-month period where I won't be partying. This could be my lifetime if I accept this and want to change it. So I ran. And in my head at that time, I made a commitment to myself that I'm only in my 20s. When I'm 30, I'm going to stop drinking. So on my 30th birthday, 3 years ago, I dumped the glass of wine I was drinking down the drain. I didn't finish it. And I began to wean myself. So I didn't stop completely, but I went down. Instead of getting shit-faced, I started just having a drink or two and a couple cigarettes, no drug. Like, I weaned myself safely. I fell off of drugs and alcohol. And so for the last 15 months, I've been completely sober and found a new level of spirituality through through recovery. I'm also a part of the OA program, which is Overeaters Anonymous, because when I stopped drinking, I gained 30 pounds like within a few months because my addiction became food again, full throttle, which was always a part of my roller coaster was weight. But it was something that I also couldn't control, and it was totally unmanageable in my life. So I found a way to find myself in that program, and to know that I'm not alone, that it doesn't define me, but it is a part of me, that I am an addict in general, and that anything for me that changes how I feel can be an addiction. So food, sex, alcohol, even healing work. I can become addicted to that because it changes how I feel. So I have decided in my life to live simply, like to live a simple life that is in resonance, that resonates with me, with who I am and what I believe. And what I believe is that anyone can find peace and anyone can find wellness. There are so many paths to wellness, and we don't have to stay to just one path. But that is my purpose, is to help people along those paths and to believe in them when they don't believe in themselves, because there have been people who believed in me when I no longer believed in myself. And the Ahuga tribe is one of those places I find that, is that there is a community of people that believe in each other. So once again, thank you, Kevin and Fran, for being lights in our community. And to each and every person who listens to this, I love you. And remember that anything's possible. You deserve it. You deserve whatever your heart desires. Thank you.